Hi, I'm doing one of those other sort of walk and talk videos today. This is just a little sort of out of sequence, just a sort of a generic, not generic, just the opposite of that, a specific sort of topical video outside of the normal sort of series that I'm doing. And I wanted to respond, now some of you will have seen the result of the Court of Appeal case with Kirsty Higgs, and that was taken on by Christian Concern and the Christian Legal Centre. And the case was one where someone had made private comments around what was taught in school, that things going against Christian beliefs in primary school, and around ethics and sexual ethics and gender and those kinds of things, and they were dismissed from their job for making those private comments, and it went to Employment Tribunal and that was upheld. But then the Court of Appeal have now come back and said no, she had the right to free speech, and that being dismissed from her job for expressing her personal views went against the human right to free speech. And I'm not planning to talk about the specifics of the case today. I just want to make a general point for Christians. I want to talk more about some legal questions, just really giving a bit of sort of amateur sort of legal opinion, if you like, in terms of where there might be some implications, where there might not be some implications for other situations. Here's the general principle, and others have said this as well, that I think it is a healthy thing when the courts recognise a right to free speech. Free speech is, generally speaking, a good thing, and I believe that Christians should be free to speak publicly and privately about what they believe. But actually that goes beyond the free speech thing. Our question should not just be, do I have the freedom to share my opinions, but should I be able to proclaim what God says? And if I'm proclaiming what God says, then that goes beyond sort of the human right to free speech, and actually to what we should be doing. It's not just that we should be free to share our opinions, but actually we want to be saying as Christians that the world around us should be listening to what God has to say. Now, what that means is that there also needs to be some wisdom about what we communicate and how we communicate. Because just because I should be free to say something from a free speech point of view doesn't mean that I should necessarily say it. I might be free to share all sorts of opinions, but that doesn't mean to say that those opinions are right. Nor does it mean that those opinions are helpful to share them. You might have a strongly held opinion to think that I am the most hideous sounding person that you've ever come across. And you, of course, have got the freedom to say that. And that might be objectively true. But whether or not it would be wise and helpful and godly to say that is a different question. And so it's very helpful for us to think first that because something relates to what we believe and to Christian truth doesn't mean to say that the way that it was said was helpful and right, and sometimes even the way that things have been expressed in public have actually moved beyond what God says, actually to how we feel about things. That doesn't mean to say from a freedom of expression point of view, you shouldn't have the freedom to say that, but there may be other checks and constraints about what we do and don't say. That's just the general point. Now, second point. When you think about this specific case, one of the questions I got asked was, will this help people that have been through similar cases? I'm just thinking of a couple of examples. One, the school teacher who got a final written warning for street preaching and the things that he'd said and how he'd said them as a street preacher. Does he now have a case to bring to say that he was treated unfairly, that is an unfair dismissal process, that he was wrongly censured on that because he was expressing his free speech? Another one I'm aware of was a lecturer at a Bible college who was dismissed due to social media comments that he made that were seen as going against tolerance and respect and care for people, particularly around sexuality. Now, those two cases are interesting. And again, I just want to step back and say, first of all, when something is decided by case law, so when a judge makes a decision on what the law is, that doesn't tend to apply back retrospectively. So if you've got a case and it's already gone to court and it's been settled and accepted, and you're sort of outside of the times when you could appeal or appeals weren't possible, or you've exhausted all of the appeals processes, you can't go back now and say this judge has declared that this is the law, so the decision against me was wrong, because that's not really how things work. The judge is interpreting the law, but they are also doing it within a context, and that means that they will set a precedent so that in the future future judges will have to consider the decision that this judge made and apply it to their case. But they will also be looking at other factors, other legal factors there, and other factual circumstances when making their decision. So what that means is there's no guarantee that any case heard in the future would now definitely be a victory for the person saying that their dismissal was a breach of their human rights, of their freedom of speech. And therefore, the judge making this decision would not be questioning or challenging previous legal decisions. They would be saying, looking at the circumstances here, this is the best interpretation of the law. So to change things retrospectively, you actually need legislation through Parliament. That's a different thing. So, first of all, generally speaking, things retrospectively don't tend to happen as a result of a court case, and it is helpful to think of those examples to see why that might not be the case. The recognition that there are differences and why there'd be a reluctance just to overturn a decision made in the past based on one specific point of law. Think of the the Bible college lecturer who made some comments on social media about Christian ethics. I think in that situation, even allowing for some freedom and some differences within things, there would be a recognition that the person was speaking and acting in a way where they undeniably were saying things that linked them to their job. They were acting as a lecturer of that Bible college because their job's involved in that kind of teaching. And that means that when they're speaking to the wider public, they can't just take off their hat that says, I work for this Bible college. And it also means that when they go into the classroom, the tutorial or the pastoral care of their students, they can't take off the hat that says, I wrote some things on social media. It is much more interconnected. It is one thing for me to say something as a private citizen, that my private opinions, especially if they're shared privately, however offensive they may be, however much other people might disagree with them, it's one thing for me to say them in a legitimate way, and that to be completely distinct from a particular job that I hold. You might not like it, but actually it doesn't affect my work. But when I start to talk about things that touch on my work, then I think there's got to be a recognition that the employer has an interest in it. And there may be some interpretation there about whether or not my opinions at that stage went outside of or were within the levels of disagreement, professional disagreement that there might be in the workplace. I guess a doctor could put some comments on Twitter or X or whatever they call it now, that would hold to a different view about how you treat a patient. And their colleagues might disagree with them on their views, that treatment. And that should be a legitimate sort of area of debate. But I think it would be possible for a doctor also to start to talk about treatment and talking away about patients that would undermine their role as a GP, as a consultant, and their employer would be right to ask questions. Similarly, a church pastor might have a blog, might write something on their Facebook page where there's an area of legitimate debate amongst Christians, even within their own church or network of denomination, about what they believe about a specific doctrine, a specific belief. But I think we would all recognise that if our pastors start saying things that actually undermine what we believe about what God's word teaches about the gospel, then their position with the church becomes untenable, obviously so. And that doesn't mean that they've not got the freedom to hold those views and to share those views, but it is right to say you can't really hold those views and still be the pastor at this particular church. You hold them anywhere else, you're free to express them and to disagree with them, but that is different. And I think that means that in those kinds of cases, there is a reasonable question from the employer about whether or not the employee has broken employment law. And I could be wrong, but I would suspect that in those kinds of cases, the courts would still look more favourably on the employer in that situation. What about the teacher who has been street preaching and people have objected and been offended at what he says, and so they've raised complaints? Now, teachers, you could say, well, that's his private life. What he does on a Saturday afternoon outside the school is his own business. But actually, teachers are subject to teaching standards that actually mean that their behaviour and their conduct outside of school, not just inside school, has got to represent the profession and the school and education well, and the values that are there. And so I think this is where that kind of case becomes more complex. Would the teacher have received a written warning for taking part in a Stop the War demonstration, the pro-Palestinian demonstrations, anti-Israel demonstrations in London over the past 2 years, reflecting some of the issues about banners and posters and chants that were perceived by many people as anti-Semitic? Would a teacher involved in those kinds of things be subject to sanction? And that's a crucial question in terms of, are people being treated fairly or differently? But the other question then is this. Is that teacher free to express their views, their opinions? I think this case would say that they have to be. But at the same time, there would still be the question about how they've gone about it. Now, not knowing the particulars of specific cases, not having been there, that's where I have to say I can't comment. But somebody may have simply reasonably and sensitively responded to questions, explained their view, opened up the Bible and talked about what the Bible says. It would be horrendous if we start to see people being dismissed for that kind of thing. But at the same time, they have a responsibility to be careful about how they conduct themselves, how they talk, and that might cross lines. So I'm not giving an opinion on specific cases in this video, but I think the answer to does this change things legally is it depends. I think it will vary from case to case. And what that means is that, coming back to my point at the start, that just because we believe that we should be allowed to say things, that we should have the freedom to say things, doesn't take away the responsibility to think about whether or not we should say them, and also how we say them. That we have moral responsibilities regardless of what the law says, what the courts say, but also that I don't think that the courts are giving carte blanche, just say and do whatever you like, that there remain constraints and limitations on freedom of expression. Freedom of expression is not an absolute right, and I think as Christians we would probably want to say we agree with that. That as a Christian, I don't think that freedom of expression trumps all other rights and responsibilities, I think there are constraints on how we express ourselves. But those are my thoughts for what they're worth. Love to hear back from you, to hear your thoughts and opinions, see what people think. Thanks for tuning in with me.